1 hour before the last flight to my mother's funeral, I found out my wife had canceled my ticket and used the refund to upgrade her lover's seat to first class.
Your mother won't know the difference. The dead don't check the guest list.
I simply walked to the gate agent's counter, set the compass down.
Pull up the legal ownership records for Palisade Aviation Group and match them against my name.
So why did the screen make her immediately reach for the phone and call the airport director? If this is the kind of story that makes you feel something, you're in the right place. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what comes next, because this is only the beginning. I want to tell you something about the morning my mother died, but to do that I have to go back further. Not years, not decades, just far enough so that when I tell you what happened at that airport, you understand that nothing about it was accidental. My name is Adrian Kessler. I'm 41 years old and I live in Omaha, Nebraska, in a house I bought outright with cash 12 years ago. To most people who know me, I'm a freelance flight route analyst, someone who works from home, wears the same kind of clothes every day, skips the charity galas and declines most dinner invitations because I'm always in the middle of something that apparently can't wait. I drive a 7-year-old truck. I make my own coffee. I am by every visible measure a man of modest habits and unremarkable ambitions. What almost no one knows is that I am the founder and controlling owner of Palisade Aviation Group, a private aviation holding company currently valued at approximately $2 billion. Palisade owns Summit Line Air, a regional carrier operating across the Midwest and Mountain West. It owns a freight logistics network, a chain of maintenance hangars, ground service operations, and charter routes that serve both corporate clients and emergency relief organizations. The ownership is structured through a private trust and a layered equity arrangement that keeps my name off the public-facing documents. The board knows who I am. A handful of senior executives know. The rest of the world does not. I didn't build it to hide. I built it because I grew up watching my mother count change at the end of the month, and I swore I would never stop working until the thing I made was real enough that no one could take it from her. And when it became real, when it became more than real, I found that the secrecy had become something else entirely. It had become a test I wasn't ready to end. My mother's name was Marianne Kessler. She raised me alone in Ironwood, Minnesota, a small town in the north of the state where winters come early and the economy never quite recovered from the decades when the paper mills started closing. She worked in the cafeteria of the last mill still running, and she was good at her job, and she never once complained about it in front of me. What she did instead was drive me every few weeks to the chain-link fence at the edge of the county's small regional airport so we could watch the planes take off. She couldn't explain lift or thrust or fuel efficiency. That wasn't the point. The point was that she wanted me to see that things could leave the ground. When I was 15, she gave me a brass compass that fit in the palm of my hand. The inside of the lid was engraved with 5 words: "Keep your bearing." She told me that success wasn't about how high other people could see you climbing. It was about whether you could still find your direction when everything around you was chaos. I've carried that compass every day since. I had it in my jacket pocket the morning she died. The call came while I was at our Omaha office finishing a routine safety review. One of Marianne's neighbors had found her after a stroke quick, the doctor said, which I understood was meant to be a comfort and wasn't. I booked the last commercial seat available on a Summit Line air flight to Minnesota that evening. The funeral was scheduled for the following morning at Maple Glen Memorial Park in Ironwood. If I missed that flight, I would miss everything. I didn't use my ownership access to arrange a charter or pull a seat from another passenger. That felt wrong in a way I couldn't fully articulate, but didn't need to. I just knew I wasn't going to do it. What I didn't know, because I had no reason to suspect it, was that my wife had already made her own arrangements. Sabrina and I met when Palisade was still a small operation, running 2 leased turboprops out of a regional airport in Iowa. She was working in corporate event planning at the time, and she found me through a mutual contact at a logistics conference. She wasn't interested in how much I earned. She wasn't angling for an introduction to someone more important. There was an afternoon early in the relationship when we sat in my truck in a parking lot watching rain streak across the windows of a small terminal, and she told me she liked the way I looked at broken systems, like every one of them was a problem that still had a solution nobody had tried yet. I thought that was the most perceptive thing anyone had ever said to me. I thought I had found the right person. 12 years is a long time, and people change, and I'm not going to pretend I was entirely blind to what was happening. Sabrina moved into corporate partnership development somewhere around year 4 of our marriage and discovered a world where status was currency, and the right name on your contact list was worth more than almost anything else. She started paying attention to who drove what, who sat where at events whose name opened doors. She started paying attention to me too, but differently. The work-from-home arrangement that had once seemed charmingly self-sufficient began to look through her new lens like evidence of a ceiling I'd hit and couldn't get past. Her mother, Colleen, had never been particularly warm toward me, but she became openly dismissive around year 7, making comments at family dinners about Sabrina having settled for comfort instead of ambition. Her brother Mitchell thought it was funny. He'd film short clips of me doing ordinary things, loading the dishwasher, mowing the lawn, and send them to the family group chat with captions I was never meant to see but always did. And then there was Camden Holt. Camden moved in Sabrina's professional circle about 2 years ago. He was a self-described investment broker with an imported car-tailored suits and an apparently inexhaustible supply of stories about deals he'd either just closed or was on the verge of closing. Sabrina admired him with an openness she no longer bothered to conceal from me. She mentioned his name often enough that I eventually did what I always do when a name starts appearing in contexts that matter. I asked our financial team to run a quiet background check. What they found wasn't criminal. It was just hollow. Camden had approached 2 of Palisade's investment partners in the past 18 months with collaboration proposals that went nowhere because he had no actual capital to bring to the table. His lifestyle was financed largely through a revolving structure of personal loans and leased assets. Everything he presented as ownership was borrowed. I didn't tell Sabrina because I believed, maybe foolishly, that she was still capable of seeing it herself. I told myself I was giving her the space to make her own judgment. What I was actually doing was waiting for a version of her that might already be gone. When I got to Prairie Gate International that evening, and my boarding app showed a canceled reservation, I assumed it was a system error. I walked to the departure gate to sort it out in person. That was when I saw them. Sabrina was standing near the gate entrance with Camden beside her, both of them dressed for travel. Colleen was there. Mitchell had his phone out. They were heading to Minneapolis for what Sabrina had described to me earlier in the week as a combined networking trip and short vacation, a detail I had registered and then set aside because I had other things on my mind, like the fact that my mother had just died. Camden was holding a boarding pass. I recognized the seat number because it had been mine. I asked Sabrina what had happened to my reservation. She didn't look away. She told me she had logged into our shared travel account, canceled my booking, and applied the credit toward Camden's seat upgrade because his original ticket had been economy, and she felt that was beneath the image they needed to project for the meetings they had scheduled. She said it clearly, without rushing. The way you explain something to a person you've already decided doesn't deserve a better explanation. The flight was full. There were no other seats. The next departure to Minnesota was scheduled for after the funeral would end. Camden turned the boarding pass over in his hand once looking at the gate, not at me. Colleen said loud enough for the couple standing nearby to hear that her daughter had finally learned to invest her energy in people with actual futures. Mitchell kept filming. "Your mother won't know the difference," Sabrina said. "The dead don't check the guest list." I stood there for a moment with the brass compass in my hand. I had taken it out without thinking, the way you reach for something familiar when the ground shifts. The gate agent at the nearest counter, her name tag read Erica Morrow, was watching with the careful expression of someone who has learned to stay very still when passengers are having very bad moments. I thought about what it would mean to walk away, to find a rental car drive through a snowstorm, arrive too late, and stand at the edge of a cemetery in the dark after everyone had gone home. I thought about the last phone call with my mother, 3 days before she died, when she asked if I could come visit soon, and I said I would come after I finished the safety review. I thought about a voicemail she had left me sometime in the past 2 weeks, one I had seen but not yet opened because every time her name appeared on the screen, something locked up in my chest, and I told myself I would listen when I was ready. I was not ready. but I was out of time. Camden shifted his weight and glanced at his watch. Sabrina straightened her jacket. Mitchell was still recording. I walked to Erica's counter, set the compass on the surface between us, and kept my voice level. I told her I didn't want her to remove any passenger from the aircraft. I told her I didn't need a scene. I asked her to do one thing: access the internal shareholder verification portal for Palisade Aviation Group and cross-reference the legal owner of record against the name on my identification. She looked at me the way people look at someone they're trying to figure out whether to call security or take the request seriously. Then she typed. The screen changed. Her expression changed with it, and not gradually. Something shifted all at once like a switch, and she reached for the desk phone without looking away from the monitor. She asked to be connected to airport operations. Then she asked for the director. Behind me, I heard Sabrina say my name, but differently than before. Erica Morrow did not hang up the phone for nearly 4 minutes. I stood at her counter and listened to her side of a conversation. I could only half follow. Confirmation codes, ownership verification levels, a request to transfer the call upward. The gate behind us was still open. The jetway door hadn't closed yet. Whatever was about to happen was happening inside a window that was getting smaller by the minute. Sabrina crossed the space between us and lowered her voice in the way she did when she wanted something to sound like a warning without technically being one. She told the gate agent that her husband had a history of making dramatic gestures when he was embarrassed that whatever name he'd given didn't mean anything, and that if this was a delay tactic, it was going to create problems for everyone involved. Erica kept the phone to her ear and did not respond. That more than anything else in those 4 minutes told me something. Camden drifted a few steps closer to the gate door, the boarding pass still in his hand. He wasn't worried yet. He looked like a man watching an inconvenient weather report, mildly interested, already certain it wouldn't affect his plans. Mitchell had repositioned himself for a better angle. Colleen stood with her arms crossed, wearing the expression she usually reserved for moments when she felt her low opinion of me was being publicly confirmed. And I stood there with the compass in my hand and tried to stay still. There was a part of me in those minutes that started to slide. Not toward doubt about who I was. I knew who I was, but towards something harder to name. I thought about the 12 years I had spent coming home to a woman who looked through me, and I asked myself, not for the first time, whether the secrecy had made it worse. Whether the version of Sabrina who sat with me in that parking lot watching rain on a terminal window had been slowly replaced by something else. Not because she was a fundamentally different person, but because I had never given her a reason to see me as anything more than what I appeared to be. I had made that choice deliberately, and deliberately meant I couldn't pretend I bore none of the weight of it. But then I thought about the last phone call with my mother, and everything else got quiet. 3 days before she died, Marianne had asked me whether I could come visit soon. Not urgently. She never asked for things urgently, because she had spent her whole life being careful not to ask for too much. She said it lightly, with this kind of warmth that made even a simple question feel like something she had set aside especially for you. I told her I would come as soon as I finished the safety review. I told her it would be soon. And she said that was fine, that she wasn't going anywhere, and she laughed a little at her own joke, and I laughed too, and that was the last real conversation we had. I opened the compass and looked at the needle. It steadied after a moment the way it always did, pointing in the only direction it knew. Keep your bearing. Not because bearing would fix anything. Not because it would get me on that plane. But because losing it wouldn't either, and I needed to get to Minnesota. The airport operations director arrived at the gate 6 minutes after Erica made the call. He came with a representative from Summit Line's regional office, and they both moved with the particular efficiency of people who had just been told something they needed to verify in person before they could fully believe it. The director asked Erica to step aside from the counter, confirmed her screen, and then turned to face me with an expression that had shifted entirely from the one he'd probably walked in with. He confirmed quietly, and without any theatrical elaboration, that the verification portal had returned a match. Adrian Kessler, founder of Palisade Aviation Group, controlling shareholder of Summit Line Air, authorized principal over the charter and logistics divisions operating under the Palisade holding structure, and incidentally the legal owner of the aircraft sitting at the end of the jetway behind him. The gate area went very quiet. Sabrina made a sound I had never heard from her before. Not a word, just a sound like something she'd been holding had slipped. 12 years of conclusions she'd built about me rearranged themselves in about 4 seconds, and I watched it happen across her face with no particular satisfaction, only a tired kind of clarity. Camden's expression was different. His went still rather than open. He understood immediately what this meant, not just in the abstract, but in the specific. He had spent 2 years trying to get meetings with people inside the investment network that Palisade touched. And the man he had just publicly humiliated at a departure gate was the person who could have either opened or closed every one of those doors. The boarding pass in his hand dropped slightly like it had gotten heavier. He said nothing. He didn't look at Sabrina. Colleen stopped talking. Mitchell's phone was still up, but his grip had changed. The director asked me what I needed. I told him clearly not one passenger on that aircraft was to be disturbed or removed. Whatever was happening here was a family matter, and it would not become a disruption to Summit Line's operation or its customers. The flight would depart on time exactly as scheduled. He nodded without argument. Then I asked him to contact the charter coordination team and begin preparing one of Palisade's light response aircraft for an immediate departure to northern Minnesota. The boarding call went out. Camden glanced once in my direction, not quite an apology, not quite acknowledgement, something in between that didn't have a name, and then he walked down the jetway without another word. The gate closed behind him. Sabrina watched it close and then turned back to me, and I could see the moment she realized that staying was the only move she had left. She and Colleen and Mitchell remained in the gate area, not because anyone asked them to, but because walking away felt, I think, like admitting something they weren't ready to admit yet. I was going to get to that funeral. I just didn't know yet what was coming next. Sabrina found her footing faster than I expected. She moved toward me and dropped the quiet register she'd been using, the one designed to sound reasonable to bystanders. She said I had lied to her for 12 years, that a man who conceals a $2 billion operation from his wife is guilty of something far worse than a canceled plane ticket, and that if we were talking about betrayal in this marriage, I should maybe start with myself. She said she deserved access to the executive lounge, to a private aircraft, to every benefit that came with being the wife of the man who apparently owned half the Midwest's air infrastructure. I told her that the marriage didn't entitle her to direct Palisade's operations, its staff, or its aircraft as personal resources. I said it once without anger because I didn't have anger left for her in that moment. I had somewhere to be. She shifted again from demand to threat. She told me she would give the story to the press, that she would describe a husband who abandoned his mother's funeral to conduct a business power play at an airport, that by the time she was done framing it, the headline would bury whatever goodwill I had. She believed, I think, that the threat of exposure was still a lever she could pull, that I would weigh the reputational cost and decide she was worth negotiating with. What she didn't know was that Erica had already printed the transaction log. The record was 4 pages. It showed that Sabrina had first accessed our shared travel account 2 days before my mother died. She had checked the seat availability on my flight multiple times across those 2 days. She had canceled my reservation within 3 hours of the moment I texted her the funeral time. She had applied the refund credit to Camden's upgrade immediately after. And at one point in the process, the booking system had generated an automatic advisory, a flag, noting that the cancellation would eliminate the traveler's only same-day connection to the destination with no viable alternatives before the following afternoon. She had clicked past it. She didn't make an impulsive decision. She planned it, watched it, and executed it, knowing exactly what it would cost me. I read the log once and set it down on the counter. Whatever I had been holding on to, whatever thread of the marriage I hadn't yet let go, released somewhere in those 4 pages. The operations team came back with an update. They had identified a light propeller aircraft that could potentially reach Red Pine Municipal Airfield, a small strip about 70 miles from Ironwood. From there, a ground vehicle could cover the rest of the distance in roughly 2 hours, conditions permitting. The funeral was less than 3 hours away. It was tight, but it was the only route available. Larger jets couldn't safely approach any airport in the Ironwood corridor because a winter storm system had moved over northern Minnesota faster than projected, closing the primary runway and limiting operations at every facility within a reasonable radius. The team was preparing the propeller aircraft when the second call came in. Red Pine Municipal Airfield had suspended all arrivals. Visibility had dropped below the minimum threshold for safe approach, and the field didn't have the instrument infrastructure to support low visibility landings. The window had closed. One of my senior coordinators stepped toward me and said carefully that there might be a way to escalate that with a direct authorization from me. They could apply pressure to reopen a field or request that a crew accept conditions outside normal safety parameters. He didn't say it eagerly. He said it the way experienced people raise options they already know the answer to because they need to hear it from you. I looked at him for the moment. Outside the tall windows of the terminal, the sky over Omaha had gone a flat, colorless gray, and I thought about the sky over Ironwood, about what it looked like up there right now, about a pilot and a co-pilot sitting in a small aircraft waiting to be told whether they were going up into it. I built Palisade on one principle before all others. Not efficiency, not profitability, not market coverage or route optimization or competitive positioning. Safety. Because the first time I lost an operation, a small charter company I'd acquired in the early years before Palisade had a name, it wasn't because of bad finances. It was because someone in the chain of command had approved a departure in conditions that didn't clear the standard, and a crew had trusted that approval, and the aircraft had come down in a field in South Dakota on a February morning. Everyone survived, but only barely, and I had stood in that field afterward and made myself a promise I had kept every single day since. I told my coordinator no. No field was to be pressured. No crew was to be asked to accept conditions outside the approved envelope. Not for a business deadline, not for a shareholder, and not for me. Sabrina, who had been listening from several feet away, said that if I was really as powerful as that screen had shown, then I should just give the order and get on the plane. She said that was what power was for, to get above the rules when the rules got in the way. She said it like it was obvious. Like the only reason a person would hesitate was weakness. I looked at her and I said, I will not put someone else's family through what I'm going through right now just so I can get there faster. That's not what I built this for. She didn't have an answer for that. Neither did Colleen. Mitchell had stopped filming entirely. I sat down in a chair by the window and took out my phone. The voicemail from my mother was still there, the one I had been carrying unopened for 2 weeks. I pressed play. Her voice came through the way it always did. Unhurried, a little warm, with that particular quality she had of sounding like she was sitting across a kitchen table from you even when she was alone. She said she didn't need me to build more routes or close more deals. She said she was proud of what I'd made. She had always been proud, but that wasn't why she called. She called to say she hoped I wasn't letting the work make me forget the way home. She said she knew I was busy. She said she just wanted to hear my voice whenever I had a minute. She said she loved me. She said that was all. The message ended. I sat with the compass in both hands and did not open it. I just held it because it was the last thing she had ever given me, and at that moment, it was the only part of her I had left. For the first time since I'd walked into that terminal, I let myself cry, not loudly, not dramatically, just the quiet kind that comes when you've been holding something too long and your hands finally give out. I had $2 billion. I had a fleet of aircraft, a network of terminals, and a staff of thousands. And I could not buy back a single minute of the time I hadn't given her. I don't know how long I sat there before my coordinator came back. Long enough for the terminal sounds to settle into something distant and separate the way ambient noise does when you've stopped trying to function inside it. He crouched down beside the chair rather than standing over me, which I noticed and appreciated, and he said there might be something worth looking at. Not a guarantee. Not a plan yet. Just something. The storm system over northern Minnesota had a gap in it. Narrow, moving the kind of corridor that exists for 20 or 30 minutes before it closes. A small propeller aircraft. The right weight class, the right ceiling tolerance departing within the next 15 minutes could potentially reach Red Pine Municipal Airfield before the corridor sealed. The field was still closed officially, but the conditions on the ground were different from the conditions in the air, and one of the maintenance crews stationed at Red Pine had radioed in with a visibility reading that was marginally above the approach minimum. Not comfortable, not the conditions you'd choose, but within the published envelope if the crew agreed. He emphasized that last part. If the crew agreed. I told him to ask them. Not instruct. Not pressure. Ask, explain the full picture, and let them decide without me in the room. I stood at the window and watched the tarmac while he made the call. Sabrina had moved to a row of seats near the far wall with Colleen, the two of them speaking in low voices I made no effort to hear. Mitchell was still somewhere in the gate area, though he'd lowered his phone. I didn't look at any of them directly. There was nothing left to say to Sabrina that the transaction log hadn't already said more clearly than I could. The coordinator came back in 11 minutes. The crew had said yes, both of them without hesitation once they'd reviewed the corridor data themselves. The captain, a woman named Diane who had been flying Palisades charter routes for 6 years, sent word that she'd flown tighter windows than this one, and that if the principal needed to get to a funeral in Ironwood, Minnesota, she would get him there. She didn't know me personally. Most of the people who worked for Palisade didn't, but she knew the company's safety record and she trusted it, which meant she trusted that if we were going, the numbers had cleared. That mattered to me more than I could have explained quickly. At the same time, without any direction from me, the maintenance team at Red Pine had gotten word through the regional operations channel that a charter was inbound. 2 of them were already preparing a 4-wheel drive vehicle with snow tires for the ground leg to Ironwood. And sometime in the previous hour, someone I still don't know exactly who started the chain had reached out to the congregation at the church in Ironwood where the service was being held. People who had known Marianne Kessler for decades, who had eaten her food in that mill cafeteria, who had sat beside her at the counter on early mornings. They asked if the burial could be moved back by 30 minutes. Not because her son was a billionaire, because they knew Marianne had been waiting a long time for that boy to come home, and it seemed right to give him a little more road. The pastor agreed without a second question. I boarded the aircraft with nothing except my jacket, my phone, and the compass. The flight took 47 minutes. I spent most of it looking out the window at the gray and white landscape below, at the way the storm had laid itself across the northern part of the state, like something that had been there forever and intended to stay. The corridor held. Diane brought us in clean with the kind of precision that makes a difficult landing look like it was never in doubt. When the wheels touched the red pine strip, I let out a breath I'd been holding so long I'd forgotten it was there. The drive to Ironwood took just under 2 hours. The roads were slow and the visibility came and went in waves, but the crew drove like they knew every curve by heart, which they probably did. I sat in the back seat and didn't say much. At some point, one of the maintenance men, a guy named Ray with graying temples and a summit-line jacket that had seen a few too many winters, said quietly that his own mother had gone the previous year. He understood what it meant to try to get somewhere in time. He didn't say it to fill the silence. He said it because it was true, and sometimes that's the only thing worth saying. We pulled into Maple Glen Memorial Park as the first words of the eulogy were leaving the pastor's mouth. I walked in alone. My jacket was damp from the parking lot. My shoes had taken on snow somewhere between the vehicle and the path, and I was aware of every face turning in the way that faces turn when a door opens at the wrong moment. I didn't stop to explain myself. I moved to the front of the gathered group and placed my hand on the casket, and I stayed there until I was sure she knew, not in any way I can prove or defend rationally, but in the way that people who have loved someone for a long time just know that I was there, that I had made it, that I had not left her. The pastor finished the eulogy. I said a few words that I hadn't prepared and couldn't have reconstructed afterward if someone had asked me to. I said something about a woman who worked in a cafeteria and drove her son to airport fences on weekends, who gave him a compass instead of a lecture, who believed in directions rather than destinations. I said I had spent a long time building roads for other people and had not always been careful enough about finding my way back to the ones who mattered. I said I was sorry for the years I had let the work be louder than the people it was supposed to serve. Nobody in that church knew I owned an aviation company. They knew I was Marianne's son, and that was the only credential that counted. The video Mitchell had recorded at the departure gate surfaced online within 48 hours of the funeral. I don't know exactly how it spread. It may have been someone nearby who filmed it independently, or a contact of Mitchell's or Mitchell himself before he thought better of it. However it started, it moved quickly because it had everything that spreads. A wife canceling her husband's flight to his mother's funeral. The line about the dead not checking the guest list. And then the moment when the airport director arrived and a different story replaced the one everyone thought they were watching. Camden was gone before the Minneapolis trip ended. He hadn't been in love with Sabrina and had never pretended otherwise to himself. He'd been in her orbit because she represented access to a professional tier he was working hard to inhabit, and the moment that access revealed itself to be connected to a man who could verify every line of Camden's financial history with a single internal request, the calculation changed completely. I didn't say goodbye. He was simply gone when Sabrina looked for him, and he didn't return her calls afterward. The boarding pass he'd been holding so casually at the gate turned out to be the most expensive thing he'd ever borrowed. Colleen attempted to reach me twice in the week after the funeral. I let both calls go and didn't return them. Mitchell deleted the video from his accounts, which accomplished nothing because the copies had already moved beyond his reach, and he sent me a text that consisted primarily of the word sorry, repeated several times. I read it and set my phone down and went back to what I was doing. Sabrina called on a Thursday evening about 10 days after the funeral. She said she had made a mistake, that she had been under enormous pressure, that the version of herself who had stood at that departure gate was not who she really was. She said the concealment of my assets was a form of deception that had damaged her ability to make real choices in the marriage, and that if we were distributing fault honestly, I wasn't without mine. That last part was true, and I didn't argue it. I had kept things from her for reasons that started out defensible and stayed that way for too long. I owned that. But I told her there was a difference between a decision I was prepared to be accountable for and what she had done at Prairie Gate International. Hiding the scale of what I'd built was something I could answer for. What she had done was study the calendar, choose her moment plan, it across 2 days, and then tell me to my face that my mother's funeral was worth less than a seat upgrade for the man she was sleeping with. The transaction log existed. She knew what it showed. Don't call something deliberate cruelty a mistake, I told her. A mistake is something you didn't mean to do. I filed for divorce the following week. My legal team closed her access to the shared accounts, transferred the relevant personal assets according to what was legally required, and made no moves against any business or professional relationship she held. I had no interest in using Palisade as a weapon against her. That would have made it something other than what I'd spent my life building it to be. 4 months after the funeral, I established the Homeward Wings Fund under the Palisade Aviation Group charitable structure. The fund covered emergency travel costs for individuals who needed to reach a dying family member, attend a funeral in another state, or respond to a sudden family crisis. People whose circumstances made a last-minute flight financially impossible. The seats weren't first class. The fund didn't offer upgrades or premium amenities. It offered seats on real flights booked quickly for people who had run out of other options. The logo was a small compass. The words underneath it said, "Keep your bearing." I didn't announce it at a press conference or a formal launch event. I drove to Ironwood on a quiet Tuesday morning in early spring when the snow had finally started to pull back from the roads. I sat beside my mother's grave for a while and told her about the fund, not the dollar amounts or the operational structure, but the idea of it. That the company we had built together with her few $1,000s of savings and my borrowed tools and our shared belief that the way people move through the world matters was going to spend part of its time making sure that no one missed a goodbye because they couldn't afford the ticket. I set the compass on the stone while I talked. When I was done, I picked it up and put it back in my pocket. I drove back to Omaha the same day. There was a Homeward Wings departure scheduled for the following morning. A young woman from Iowa City who needed to reach her father in Spokane before the week was out. I wanted to be in the operations center when the flight went out. Not to oversee it, just to see it go. I stood at the window of the hangar in the early morning light and watched the aircraft move toward the runway with the particular slow deliberateness of a machine that knows what it's doing. I took out the compass and opened it. The needle swung once, found its direction, and settled. For the first time in longer than I could measure, I wasn't hiding what I was. I wasn't managing what people saw or calculating what to reveal and what to protect. The man who had built all of this, and the man who had stood beside his mother's fence watching planes lift into the sky, were the same person again, and I could feel that not as relief exactly, but as a kind of weight setting down. The aircraft reached the end of the runway. The engines changed pitch, and then it was moving fast, and then it was gone, climbing out through the morning, carrying someone home. My mother used to say that the most important direction any compass can show you isn't north. It's the way back to the people who matter before it's too late to find them. I built a $2 billion aviation empire out of routes and schedules and the belief that getting people where they need to go is one of the most important things a business can do. And it took losing her and nearly missing the last chance to say goodbye to understand something I should have known much earlier. The most valuable journey isn't the one that takes you furthest from home. It's the one that brings you back in time. There are a few things I carry with me from everything that happened, and I want to leave them with you. The first is, this real power is not the ability to make other people follow your rules. It is the ability to hold on to your own principles when everything around you is falling apart, when the easy thing and the right thing are pointing in opposite directions, and only you know which one you're choosing. The night I refused to order a crew into dangerous conditions to get myself to that funeral faster, I wasn't being noble. I was just remembering what I had promised myself in a field in South Dakota years before. Power that puts other people in danger to serve your personal needs isn't power. It's just selfishness with a bigger budget. The second thing is harder to say, but I think it matters. There is a real difference between a mistake and a deliberate act dressed up as one afterward. A mistake is something that happens when you don't see clearly. What Sabrina did at that gate, the 2 days of planning, the careful timing, the decision to wait until I was standing there in person so she could watch, that was a choice made clearly with full knowledge of what it would cost me. When someone asks you to forgive cruelty by calling it a lapse in judgment, you are allowed to know the difference. Forgiveness is yours to give or withhold on your own terms. But naming a thing accurately is not the same as being unforgiving. Sometimes it is the only honest thing left to do. The third thing is about what you do with the pain once it's yours. I could have used what I had to make things very difficult for the people who hurt me. I had the resources and for a while probably the motivation. But Palisade was never built to be a weapon, and turning it into one would have meant betraying every person who helped build it, including my mother, who gave me her savings and her trust when I was nothing but a young man with a theory and a compass. The Homeward Wings Fund didn't come from generosity. It came from grief, and from the very specific understanding that I had nearly been the person on the wrong side of an impossible situation. If the pain taught me anything useful, I wanted it to go somewhere useful. And the last thing, maybe the simplest one, is just this: don't wait. Don't wait until the system fails you, or the weather closes in, or the people you trusted make a choice that takes the option off the table. If there is someone you have been meaning to call them. If there is a trip you have been putting off, stop putting it off. The voicemail. I was too afraid to open for 2 weeks. I would give everything I have built to have heard it while she was still there to hear back. My mother gave me a compass and 5 words. I've tried to live by them. I don't always get it right. But the needle still moves, and as long as it does, I know which direction to face. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of someone or something you've been carrying, then you're exactly the kind of person we make these stories for. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications, because every story we tell is about real weight, real choices, and the kind of people who find their way through both. We'll be here when you need it, and we'll always save you a seat.